Welcome to the Pillar Podcast, where we put racial equity front and center. Join us as we explore equity. We'll take a look at overcoming opportunity gaps and strategies that ensure equitable learning experiences for all students in JCPS.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Pillar Podcast. This is Season 2, Episode 4. My name is Ian Brandon. I will be your host today, DEP Satellite Office Supervisor, and today I am here with the Dr. Stephanie White. Stephanie, how are you?
I'm great, Ian. How are you?
I am doing very well today. Happy to have you. Stephanie, you are our diversity hiring specialist. And what I know about that role is you're here to attract, recruit, and retain talent. You do a lot of collaborations with human resources and supporting hiring practice for different levels at the schoolhouse and at the district, correct?
Yes.
So within that role, what's sort of the difference between the talent pool at the schoolhouse level versus the district level?
Well, actually, at the school level, I mostly support administrative hires. So that would be counselors, assistant principals, safety administrators for middle and high. So the difference is that, one, there's typically a good amount of candidates for those positions because these are people who are typically looking to leave the classroom or someone who's recently been certified administratively, so they're looking for new experiences, things like that. So it's usually more of a robust pool. I would say in the district level, this is a completely different level of leadership. So we still have a good amount of people who are interested in those positions, but it's a very different level. So not saying that people couldn't transition easily from the schoolhouse to district office, but it's just a bigger scope. So like one of the things that we typically look at people going from schoolhouse to district is, are you able to pull yourself out of that smaller setting of the school to have a more broader lens? So it's just a little bit different, but at the same time, still a lot of the same principles. Want to make sure that people understand how to translate their leadership from their current role to whatever the new role is, and then also that they have that equity focus and understanding, because that's something that we're working to permeate our entire district with. So ideally, it should be difficult to be a leader in JCPS if you don't lead through an equitable lens.
Yeah, I know that's a big part of not only our department DEP, but I know specifically in your role, and that's something I definitely want to expound upon as we get a little deeper into the interview. But I want to circle back to almost this time last year, pretty close. You were interviewed by another DEP, Diversity, Equity, and Poverty employee, DeJuan Williams.
Yes.
In that interview, we learned a lot about you. Professionally and personally. And I know one of the things you mentioned is that you already had your superintendent license, and you were working towards your SHRM certification, and I believe that's the Society for Human Resource Management, correct? So how is that certification coming along? Is that something you're still working towards?
Well, with the SHRM, I actually completed that in February of this year. So
congratulations.
Yeah. Thanks. I was excited to add that certification. And it's really been helpful as well because it, coming from the schoolhouse as an educator and administrative there, it gave me the human resource perspective because my job, while it is in DEP, I liaise and collaborate with our human resources department a great deal. And then as I support hiring, it's important for me to have that scope of understanding of what human resources entails and how those things function. So I think it's been beneficial because it gives me a broader view and also allows me to just have a better understanding of how diversity fits into human resources and that entire scenario. But at the same time, it allows me to strengthen some of the protocols and things that I have in place so that I'm a better support to principals and to hiring managers.
And I like that because I too have, we talked about this a little bit before we got going, my mind kind of works in processes and systems. So have you been able to, in real time, apply new systems to that equity lens you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, actually, I have, and I am working in collaboration with Chung Fisher and Courtney and our research department, because we're doing a program evaluation together. Because I think that it's important that we look at the protocols that I've put in place and that we're working through in this work to support diverse hiring, to make sure that we're getting the outcomes that we anticipate. So being a researcher myself, I think it's important to start, from the beginning with the program evaluation. So even though we started kind of a year into this process, it's much better to be able to align our activities, align our thinking and the different things that are in place. And also our support of documentation across the district as far as like the equity progress monitoring tool that principals have to submit on behalf of their school. How are all of these practices aligned from a diversity hiring standpoint? So I'm trying to be very intentional with making sure that the support is in place for principals and hiring managers, and also are we getting the outcomes that are expected based on these things that are in place? And if not, one good thing about the program evaluation is that it allows for tweaks in the process, because building a strong process is really part of why this is such a crucial step.
Yeah, and I think what comes with that process and evaluation is the accountability piece. And I know that's a lot of what we deal with in the work that we do. It's just ensuring policy processes, people divisions, and just from top down, there's that accountability level. And so you mentioned researcher. I think it's safe to assume with the title of doctorate, you are familiar with research amongst other skills and jobs that you've had, which we learned last year, again, with that interview with Dewan. You shared a lot about your journey to getting to this point. The various roles and jobs you've had, since teenager. Specifically, you mentioned a little interest in film and video production. There was a series that you kind of laid out there that you were working on for Envision Equity. That's essentially essentially managed by Dr. Abdul Sharif. How's that story developing? Is that something you're still working on?
Yeah, something that I do still work on. So what I wanted to do was start celebrating schools that are doing it very well. So we started with just recognizing different schools, recognizing principals. I did a whole piece back in March on the different female high school principals, because right now we have a tremendous amount more than we've had previously. And then, but it's evolved over time to celebrations and also providing information. Like the last thing that I wrote for Envision Equity is about leading from where you are. So not only introducing my role as part of our department, but trying to instill with folks that there are different pathways that you can take across JCPS depending on what your interests are. So, and also trying to show people and reassure folks that there are pathways to take and there are reasons to stay within our district, because you can continue to grow in your learning and in your job responsibilities, and of course in your pay as you move up the career ladder. So just trying to make sure that I'm being transparent with telling people many of you, people are already leading where they are. They're already being a part of committees. They're already supporting students through sponsoring activities and things like that. And all of that counts, whether you're a leader in your school building, in the community, within your church. So trying to make sure that people don't sell themselves short, because it's actually something that I see often. Because I think when you get used to what you do, and this is just how you operate, you don't see it as the awesomeness that it is.
Yeah, correct.
So I'm trying to make sure that I'm uplifting as we go. Like I recently did a PD as part of the leadership hiring series from the Wallace Grant work with Director Faith Stroud. And so there's a group of us that have been putting together PD sessions to support our pipeline program that we're able to build through the Wallace Foundation grant. So just last week I did one on resumes and cover letters, because that is your in, and that's your first impression when you're applying for a job. So sometimes with just some tweaks, some tricks, and not even tricks, but just making sure that people have an understanding of what should be on those documents, how to translate their work experience to this new position. So just trying to give people the tools that they need. So it's not only about helping in the hiring process, but also how do you get to a point where you're a good candidate for this position. So trying to be well-rounded in the approach to make sure that people have the support that they need to move forward.
Yeah, so the narrative, I think, is what you're speaking of as far as what diversity looks like in the schoolhouse. Has that changed? It sounds like it has with a lot of the information and work you're putting out.
It's definitely changing. Last year, of all of the administrative hires, which was a little over 300, 47% of those were people of color, which is a huge win. And just exciting, because we're trying to have a district that better mirrors the ethnic and linguistic diversity of our students. So being able to say that we're actively putting that in place and we're actively looking for candidates, I think is a huge win. At the same time, the pools are depleting, so we have to constantly recruit and constantly bring in people at various role groups so that we can continue to have a pipeline. But at the same time, we still have work to do. And I think that people in general, hiring managers, principals, are open to having a more diverse staff. So it's not necessarily a situation where people are, staunchly resistant and they just don't want to. I think that the majority is definitely very interested in having that diversity within their staff. So we're working towards it. It's just a matter of, let's make sure we keep getting people that can fulfill the roles, because the talent is there. It's not an issue of we have people, but they're not able to be leaders. It's just, do we have more people of color, or and not just people of color, but people who understand how to work with any student and are willing to learn and grow themselves professionally so they can be supportive of our student body.
It's the willingness. I think that's the key for me there. I think a lot of people have the capability, maybe even the capacity, but is the will there to carry it over to,
I would say for the vast majority, absolutely. It is definitely there. I do think that there's always a small percentage of folks who don't see the value yet, but that's the good thing about having a policy, because we can better help them change their behavior when they have directives. For example, right now, I'm able to participate along with our principal supervisors with some training through the Leadership Academy. And this training is specifically to work on equity leadership. So our leadership within the district has found this very relevant. And through funding with the Wallace Grant, we're able to allow our principal supervisors to get some additional training so that they're better able to support principals, so that we have a much stronger accountability piece throughout our district.
From the seat that you're sitting in now, I can look back over your time in the district. Principal for 6 years, you taught English language arts, you've been an administrator in both middle and high school, so your K through 12 experience is very vast. I'm going to imagine that you use those years of experience in the role you're in now, as far as having not just the equity lens, but knowing what goes on at the grassroots level, on the ground, what it takes to recruit, what it takes to retain talent. How do you combine all those experiences and those various roles, kind of package it up to be effective in the role you're in now?
Well, one thing that I think has been a great help over my time at JCPS is relationships. So being this is my 17th year in the district, so I've met a great amount of people, and then spending time as a principal and assistant principal, then I've met a tremendous amount of administrators, many of those who are still in place. Yeah. So one thing that I think is an aid for me is that I have relationships with people who I'm talking to about their hiring practices. So as I'm talking to them about what their data is showing with their student demographics and their staff demographics, and saying, what can I do to help you? It's not coming from a place of I'm the diversity police that's coming to make sure that so many things are in place. I think that they understand that this is a genuine support structure to say, how can I support you in this work? Here's what I can do for you. And knowing the demands of the principalship, I'm able to say to principals, tell me what you're looking for and I'll make your questions. I can let's talk through what you're trying to say and what you need. So that way they don't have to do, this is something I can take off their plate, even down to they leave that meeting, that consultation meeting, with an artifact for that EMPT document. Because I don't want you to have to go back later and try to figure out what you need to put down to evidence our consultation. I'm giving it to you. Here it is. I'm going to share it with you. I'm doing the writing as we're talking. So just trying to make sure that when that conversation is over, or we're at the end of that they have a tangible that they can use, and that we are able to have conversations that informs not only their practice for hiring that particular role, but hopefully permeates their hiring throughout their school building or through their departments.
And yeah, you mentioned earlier the equity progress monitoring tool, and that's something principals use quite frequently. You talk about providing that evidence, right? Evidence of the work, having these artifacts. How does the evidence gathered from the equity progress monitoring tool help principals see the structure and systematic benefit that comes from approaching diversity in general holistically?
One, as we're talking, I think that I mispronounced the acronym, so it's the Equity Monitoring Progress Tool. So I want to make sure I had that correct. But so from an evidence standpoint, it's all about alignment, in my opinion. So looking through that document and the domains that are involved, it's about what are we doing, and then how are we showing that we are being intentional with our practices? How are we able to represent the impact that our practices and our changes are having? And how do we know that it's benefiting students? How do we know it's getting to the desk of all students? So specifically for my domain, which is staffing and classroom diversity, I have we ask questions and we have discussions about what is this person going to do? What's their responsibilities? What do you need from them? What kind of skill set do they need? So that we're able to paint a picture of not only the role, but how does that role fit into the structure of the school? So with all the different domains within this document, it's all about what's happening in the school, how are we being intentional about it, what gap or concern are we addressing, what are we putting in place, and then what's the impact of that? How do we know it's successful? And even if it's not successful, what have we learned in the process, and what do we need to change or tweak or just make a shift so that we can have better impact moving forward? So I think the evidence piece, people get, I think sometimes people feel like it's a huge entity in itself, but it's really all about, well, what are you doing in your school? How are you being intentional to make sure you're being inclusive? And how do you know that you're looking through a lens of equity so the students are getting what they need? So same kind of thing. It's just a matter of, I think, perspective and making sure that you're being intentional with recording those things.
Yeah. And I think, too, because I'm a visual person. I'm a visual learner, so having something I can see in front of me, from beginning to end, right? I can literally track, okay, well, this is where I was a month ago, right? This is my end goal. Like, how am I pacing? Did I miss anything? I think having the policy and processes that you're working on and you speak of, these are all, I won't say little, but they're all pieces to a bigger puzzle.
Right.
So I think it's easier to put the puzzle together if you have all the pieces, right?
Absolutely. That's the goal.
And so one thing I know a lot of focus is on equity, diversity in hiring. But I think one thing that coincides with the diversity piece is having a diverse candidate who's also culturally competent. Right?
Absolutely.
I think that's, to me, in my opinion, something that gets kind of overshadowed. Talk a little bit about what cultural competence is as it relates to hiring practices, how that ties into the teacher in the classroom, and how that affects student outcomes.
Okay. So essentially, when we talk about cultural competence or cultural humility, there's a lot of different terminology that's used. It's essentially having an awareness and also being able to participate and communicate within a setting where you see culture, you see differences as a value add. And it's something that you make visible. So, for example, if I'm a teacher in a classroom and I have various students in my room, regardless of who's in the room, who's not in the room, are we looking at things from different perspectives? Or is it only just my perspective as a teacher that I'm communicating? So that's something that definitely hits the desk of students. When students are doing projects or they're doing their daily assignments, what choices do they have, or what availability is it where they can bring in their own culture, their own experiences, so that they can connect to the learning and it becomes relevant for them. And just being intentional with concepts. So for example, if you're explaining a concept that has something to do with, I don't know, let's just say the ocean. Well, if I've never seen the ocean, it's hard for me to understand what you're talking about.
Right.
So something as simple as show a quick video so the kids have a mental picture that they can attach to, or having an awareness that everybody hasn't been to the ocean, or something like that.
Correct.
So I'm being very simplistic, but at the same time, these are very small things that allow people to feel included and visible and seen in the room and not left behind. Because if I've never seen the ocean, you're going on with the lesson, and I'm still stuck on, well, what is she talking about with the ocean? So I've missed the whole the whole lesson. Yeah. So something like that, but also just having that awareness that your experiences are your own, but they're not everyone's experiences, and being open to the fact that we are all still learning and on a continuous journey. And just because I've experienced something one way, and that's my perspective, that doesn't mean that I'm correct and that it's the only perspective.
Right.
It means that I am part of the conversation. And that's a piece that I would like people to understand, because regardless of your being a person of color or not, that doesn't mean that you understand your own perspective or anyone else's. So it's about having that awareness and being willing to continue to grow and grow in yourself. So not necessarily where if I have a question about something that's happening with a Native American person, I'm not dependent on just a Native American person to educate me, but I'm looking at things on my own to say, how can I better understand what's being communicated? So that's the continuous learning part, and the willingness that you mentioned earlier, because you have to be willing to admit that you don't know everything, number one.
Yeah, correct.
And then to be willing to investigate more on your own and through available resources.
Yeah, I think again, if you you're in a position, so you're in the classroom, and right out of the gate, if you don't make a connection either with that particular educator or something in the subject, right? You're lost right out of the gate. Like if you have no context, so it's something that's, like you said, as small as having the idea that we may not have the same experiences. You know, I may listen to R&B. That doesn't mean everybody listens to R&B. So I think we can take for granted the experiences that we have had, and in some instances the lack of experiences from other people that we're engaging with. So.
Absolutely.
I know you do a lot of collaboration, and I know one individual in particular you collaborate with and have been over the last year is Jasmine Drinkard, our district diversity manager. She leads what we call infinity groups. There's a number of infinity groups within the district. Talk a little bit about that collaboration with Jasmine. What role do you take on in working with those infinity groups? And how does an educator, a leader at any level wind up in the seat with you as it relates to interacting and engaging based upon those infinity groups?
So I have the opportunity to work with Jasmine, and she's doing amazing work with all of our affinity groups, or sometimes people call them employee resource groups. So they have different names depending on where you are. So I help with some of the leadership, so being a thought partner for her. She is, that's definitely her realm, and I play a very supportive role. I also attend meetings. I'm working with a few people from the Latinx ERG right now because we're doing some community outreach at Adelante. So I needed some Spanish speakers, so I asked them if they would be willing to support that, and they've definitely jumped on board. So I have an opportunity to just, be part of the groups and to talk. We definitely are always looking to expand those groups. And one thing that you mentioned educators, but I want people to know that these are open to any employee.
That's good, yeah.
In the district. So whether you are actually in the classroom as a teacher or an instructional assistant, bilingual associate, all of those things are definitely welcome. But if you work in housekeeping, if you're in custodial, if you're in building grounds and maintenance, they are open to everyone because the goal of them is connection. So anytime we can bring people together around common goals, we're definitely interested in being able to do that. And it also increases that sense of belonging because you start to know other people. And then it also, another benefit I think it has is it allows networking and
Yes.
some of those connections. So if you are a person that's working in a department around the same people all the time and you want to expand your reach, it's a great way to get involved and meet people from all over the district. So that's, so my role is more, I'm definitely supportive. I do whatever Jasmine asked me to do. And just really want to help build the relationships and the different groups as we expand.
Yeah, I work with Jasmine quite often, and I love the work she's doing in that realm. I've attended a number of events with the Black ERG, the Employee Resource Group, and the networking opportunities are endless. You get to not only see and meet other leaders and educators that look like you, but also get to learn about different roles that are out there. Such a huge district, you don't really know where everyone comes from, and I love stories, so I love hearing people's stories, and it's a great networking opportunity. I would encourage any JCPS employee to seek out their particular infinity group. That was one thing I enjoyed about our Black Educator Social we did last year here at the Shawnee Satellite Office. Man, it was an array of people here. Like you said, from bus drivers to custodial staff, to managers, specialists, chiefs. Like it was a wide range, and I think we kind of take for granted some of those opportunities to connect with one another. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll even throw out that with the affinity groups, they don't necessarily have to be according to race or ethnicity or gender, those kind of things, because you can have different ones that are built. I know Jasmine says she's open to. So, for example, some articles that I've been reading lately talk a lot about the generational differences in the workforce right now, because you have people who are working longer, past traditionally when they would retire, because they can, number one, because they're a lot healthier, but then at the same time, so you have people in their 60s that are still working, and then you have people as young as 18, 19, 20 that could be in the same location. So having some intergenerational affinity groups, or just a group, where anybody could join of any age group, that's a way to have some good, meaningful conversation, because you're looking at, we do a lot of conversation around Gen X and millennials and baby boomers and all this kind of stuff. So we tend to want to categorize folks, but there definitely needs to be some dialogue in those areas, because we all have to learn how to not only coexist, but to learn from one another so we can continue to grow and innovate. So I think that that's an opportunity, hopefully, that we're able to bring to fruition at some point soon.
Yeah. So I want kind of switching gears here. I want to talk a little bit about the recruiting and retaining aspect of your role. To me, recruiting and retaining talent in some ways overlap. How different are the two objectives, and how do you approach?
I'm going to start with retention, because I think that this is a very underutilized piece, because when you have people that are already in your organization, you want to retain them, because number one, they have institutional knowledge, they have experience, they understand how many things work currently. So you definitely want to keep your experience, but at the same time, you have to continue to offer opportunities for them to grow within their specific roles or within their career trajectory. So I think that is something that is underutilized, because you may hear people saying, well, if somebody doesn't want to be here, they should just move on. It's like, well, wait a minute. Let's figure out if we have something else
easy
that they want to do so that we can keep them. So I think the retention piece is tremendous. Now, with recruiting, I think that has to be a constant. You have to constantly be in a state of recruitment, because you're always going to have people who are retiring, people who are moving on to new opportunities, people who are doing different things. So we have to constantly replenish our workforce, because we're serving approximately 96,000 students, and they're going to keep coming. So it's not a thing where we're closing schools; we're building schools. So
right.
It's one of
the opposite.
Yeah. So they're going to need their support not only in the schoolhouse, but through all of our support structures in the district. So with recruiting, not only do we have to be continuous in that effort, but we have to make it attractive. We have to make sure we're listening to the employees that we do have, because one of the strongest recruiting tactics is that word of mouth. I love where I work. Come work. You should come and work where I am. Or if employees are telling folks, yeah, I love my school. I love what I'm doing. I love this. And that brings people in. And so if you're not doing a good job of retaining employees, building community with our employees, then they're not telling their friends to come and apply. They're telling them to go somewhere else. So we want to make sure that we're constantly working on retaining and supporting the staff that we have in place and their growth trajectories, as well as consistently recruiting and making JCPS a very attractive choice.
Yeah. And for once you have someone either in the pipeline for retention or recruitment, for either one of those aspiring leaders, specifically a minority aspiring leader, someone looking to make a lasting impression, what advice would you give as it relates to the application process for someone who may be in a recruitment stance, and then also for someone who may be at a point where they're accepting an interview or actually have an interview? Mm-hmm. What are some of the things you think that aspiring leader could benefit from?
Well, first, I always suggest looking at your resume and cover letter as your first impression. But even before you get to that point, when you're looking at the job posting or you're looking at a position that you may be interested in that you heard may be coming available or something. So even from that early standpoint, or even if you're a person who is trying to decide what's next and you have a couple things that you might be interested in, but there's not really openings yet, take a look at that job description. That's what I tell people to start with. Look at the job description, see what those expectations are for that role, and see how it matches up to your experience. So I often tell people to use it as a checklist. It's not an end-all be-all, but at the same time, it gives you a scope of what the position would entail, and you can look and see how what you do or what you've done matches up to that. Or if it's something that you haven't had experience with, how can you get that experience so that you're ready? So that's one step. With the resume, always make sure it's up to date, that you're showcasing your work with declarative sentences about improvements that you may have made, things that you've led, professional development that you may have facilitated, inclusive of community, church. I think all of those things are very important. Another thing to think about is when you're writing your cover letter, use that as an opportunity to relate your experience to how you will lead or perform in this new position.
Yeah.
That's the whole purpose of it. Like sometimes people think of it as more of it's an introduction. Well, I'm just, telling them a little bit about me, but really they're going to look at the resume.
At the resume, correct.
The resume stands as it is. The cover letter is an opportunity to relate your experience to what you would do in this new position. So sometimes I think people miss that opportunity because they don't make those direct connections. And take the time to look up the department or the school that you're applying to so you can make some connections to what they have going on or what they need to the expertise that you bring. So those are with those two documents. As you prepare for the interview, depending on the role you're going to take, make sure that you're informed as much as you can be. Whether you looked at their website, maybe if you know somebody that's in the department or something that you can talk to, somebody who maybe used to work in the department. So that's where your networking comes into play. But then also think about your impact. What has been successful as a result of your work? I talk to a lot of people who will say, oh, well, I don't want to come off like I'm bragging. It's like, no. This isn't bragging. This is about you being aware of what you bring to the table.
Correct. That's the difference.
Yeah, so it's like, think about things that you've led or things that you've participated with that were better because you were there. So then that way you can think about, well, what impact did I have on that professional learner community? What impact did I have on that committee that I led? Or even as a coach, what kind of seasons did you have? Were you a coach that won? A coach that took a dismantled team and turned it into a strong situation? So it's sometimes people get reluctant to say what their impact was.
Yeah.
And that's something that we have to break. Because that's the reason that you're moving into this new role, because you think that you can have a bigger impact in this new role. So you can't think about in that lane and not think about what impact you've already had. So those are the things that I always share with folks.
Yeah, and that's something I can say personally. I've had to be intentional about, because you're in certain roles for a certain amount of time, or you're doing specific work, and at some point it just becomes a part of your DNA. So maybe to you it may not seem like much, but to those looking at you, it's a big deal. So it's okay to kind of put your chest out a little bit and kind of put yourself in the forefront.
Can I add one thing to that, Ian?
Yeah.
Don't assume that if you haven't done all the things that are on that job description that you can't do that job. if you've done a few of them, you feel free to go ahead and apply.
Yeah. Put yourself in the game.
Yeah, because in any job, there's going to be a learning curve. I don't care who you are. And if you're taking a job where you're not going to be learning anything, you're taking the wrong job. So
Absolutely.
make sure that you are willing to step out and be vulnerable.
So I'd like to know, since being in this role, this is year 2, correct? Mm-hmm. What has been, or what are some of the biggest challenges you've encountered while trying to move the needle in the work you do with equity?
I would say with challenges, it's just a matter of trying to find the best way to reach people, because the work that I do is very people-oriented. So I have to find a way to establish some common ground in those relationships, because I don't want, like I said, I'm not the people that are coming to knock you over the head if you don't do right by diversity in your building, but I am the person that's trying to help you understand why it's important and how we can find ways to create that landscape for diversity, or that situation where people have a better sense of belonging. So I think sometimes it's difficult. It's not difficult, but it may cause some extra thought work to figure out with certain people, how can we get to a place where you don't see me as a threat or an extra thing that you have to do. So I think that could be it. And then also a challenge that we have is the pool. We don't have as many as much diverse representation in all of our hiring pools as we'd like, whether that's looking at women, whether that's, I was talking to a director of facilities yesterday, and the challenge was, it's not many women or people of color in that particular role group that she's encountered. So it's like, and that's something that's happening with our schools too. So it's like, we want to hire more diversity, but it's not, we don't have the applicants. So I think it's important as a district, you know, with our HR department and my work, that we're really trying to find, recruit, change, because some people right now, teaching doesn't look like the most attractive position. So that's something that as a national workforce, we have to work on. You know, so biggest challenge is, you know, that pool, and then also find a common ground so we can have a foundation for the conversation.
Yeah, and I know you specifically, not just our department, but you have a lot of support in the work that you do top down, and that's a huge component to success. So using that, is the common ground something you use to, I guess, kind of ease the conversation, right? Helping leaders to be comfortable having an uncomfortable conversation about diversity and equity within their schoolhouse.
Yeah, and one of the things that I often say is, we talk about uncomfortable and difficult conversations, and we have to get to a point where we know that those things exist, but we have to put our focus on intentional conversations, because it's not that we're trying to get someone to do something that they don't want to do. Because if you're a person that loves kids, because that's why we get into this profession, or wants to support students and families, then you should want to be equitable in your practices. So it's not a situation where we should have to force people to think differently about equity or to even think of equity. It's just a matter of building in the sense of urgency and having intentional conversations about why this needs to happen or how it affects our students and families. Because at the end of the day, schools are built for kids.
Yeah.
So if we don't have any kids, then we don't have a school, and we don't have a district, and we don't have any of those things. So it's not about what makes us comfortable as adults, because we got into this business so that we can make the lives of children better.
Correct. Yeah.
So we can't do that if we're not willing to grow and adapt and change ourselves so that we can better support the students we propose to love.
Not to insinuate you're an aspiring applicant for a position, but I want to give you an opportunity to put your chest out a little bit and pat yourself in the back. So I'm interested in knowing what's been your biggest accomplishment since you've been in this role.
Some accomplishments have been, like I said, we had almost half of our administrators hired last year were administrators of color, which is huge.
It's big.
And while that's not my achievement alone, I'd like to say that I hopefully played a part in that. I did give my SHRM certification, so that was big. But I think one of the biggest things is that just developing a set of protocols to support schools and being able to make connections with new people. Like one of the best things about my position is that I talk to everybody. And that's not something that most people have the opportunity to do. So like I literally talk to schools, every department, every piece of JCPS I'm able to connect with. So I think that gives me a very unique perspective. And it also allows me to listen and make connections for people, because sometimes we may not be as familiar with talking to other departments depending on how collaboration is done within departments. But I am a person that permeates our district. So sometimes I'm able to say, hey, I heard you say this, and I heard this is the way another department thought about this issue or solved this issue, so I'm able to be a connector.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I really enjoy that piece.
Absolutely.
So,
and I think that fits your personality as well.
Yeah, definitely.
From what I know, on a personal standpoint, it's like hand in glove. So I'm happy and fortunate that you specifically are in that role, or in this role. Excuse me.
Thank you.
What advice does the Dr. White in this seat right now, 2 years into this role, give to the Dr. White who was sitting in the interview chair 2 years ago?
Well, I will say that, number one, you really don't know what you're getting into. Because this job has been much more than, and not more than I anticipated, but different than I anticipated. So that which is a good thing.
Yeah.
But I would say, starting the role, it was a nonstop crazy pace last year, because we had a lot of factors that brought a tremendous amount of hiring. So we added the safety administrators with funding for middle and high school changing. They were able to add extra counselors and mental health support, which was excellent. In some cases, assistant principals. So we had a administrative hiring boom last year. So I was extremely busy, to say the least. So that being the way I started, I was like, oh my gosh, is this going to be the way it always is? But I'm seeing, we have ebbs and flows, which is great. But I think at that time I was just like, okay, I need to do this and do that and do it right now. So being able to pull back a little bit, it's been good to say, okay, we put some things in place. Now let's go back and refine it. Let's go back and get some feedback. Let's see what needs to be changed. So it's been great so I guess it was great to hit the ground running, because you didn't really have time to second guess yourself as much. But on this side of the equation, it's nice to be able to do some reflecting and kind of redefining how those things look, now that I have the experience of what many people need and how they want that kind of support. So it's better to be able to really build out that system without the overload, because the overload made me perform. Do it now.
Doing that, immediately.
So this is a good opportunity now to kind of say, okay, well, here's what worked, here's what didn't, here's how we can make some adjustments. So I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, and you mentioned the safety administrator position. I know that's a new role here in the district, and I may be off on the number, but I think we've hired 65, 68,
pretty close,
maybe
yes.
something around there. And that we're actually having that conversation on tomorrow with the NAACP JCPS Community Forum, we will be speaking with a safety administrator and learning more about that role. I know that's new and something I'm definitely looking forward to. One last question I have for you, and I'd like to end each episode with this question. Is there a particular person, leader, doesn't have to be an educator, that has influenced or inspired Dr. White to do the work that she's doing right now?
Well, thinking about me now, currently, and the journey and what's ahead of me versus what's behind me, I think a very influential person has been Dr. Marshall, John Marshall. It's really interesting to me to see how he's been able to build this department, Diversity, Equity, and Poverty Department, over the years and expand the role to encompass different things. Because when you're a small department initially, and to grow to where, we have 30, 40 people in our department now, and being able to go from one person doing most of the things to being able to specialize in different areas, like even with my position as a result of the racial equity policy, I think it's extremely influential and encouraging to see. And so one of the things that I've been able to learn in the past year and a half in this position is how to make some different things happen or think in some different lanes. So I think that he's been really good about, he's very transparent, which I appreciate. So he's somebody that I can ask questions to and say, well, how did you do this? Or how did you make this happen? Or, we talk about future things and future state and how to drive the work even further. And I think that he's definitely been a visionary in his role. So, and I can really appreciate what goes into it, dealing with pushback and feedback, unsolicited or not.
That part.
So, so I think it's helping me grow in a different level because it's not about trying to be effective in a school or be effective in this particular setting. It's about how do we scale this to the 17,000 people that work in this district, and potentially everybody knew who we had. So it's a completely different level, which is exciting. But I always appreciate his transparency and willingness to answer my questions and things of that nature, because it helps me to really kind of qualify the work, but then also understand how the outcomes and the planning and those pieces fit together to really push at a pace that works, where we can affect kids now in real time. So he's been very influential for me in this role.
Yeah, I know it's funny you used the word visionary. That's one word I would definitely use to describe Dr. Marshall. Very thought-provoking. Again, you can push and will push you, but it's necessary for the work that we do. And I would also I give major kudos to Dr. Marshall for that. So much so, the fact that we're even here having this conversation today. I know the podcast, this podcast, The Pillar, was something that he envisioned last year and kind of laid out the overarching goal and just said, hey, run with this. And I love the direction that it's going. It definitely it's helped me to gain insight to what each one of us do daily, right? The impact that we all have with not only with what we're doing directly, but how that affects kids directly and indirectly. And so I'm very appreciative of that. So thank you for your time. I've enjoyed having you. This has been another episode of the Pillar Podcast. My name is Ian Brandon, and I am with the Dr. Stephanie White.
Thank you, Ian. It's been great to talk to you.
Absolutely. Thank you.